The mockery of hunger. The orbital station of Kairon bustled with endless movement. Merchants peddling wares, mercenaries boasting of battles, bureaucrats drifting through corridors in silken robes. Amid the noise and light, in the cavernous food hall, sat a girl who did not belong. Lira sat alone at a corner table, her thin hands pressed against her stomach, her large silver eyes dull with exhaustion. Her species, the Veyari, had once commanded respect as artisans and starfarers. Now, after their defeat in a brutal war, they were scattered refugees, forbidden from holding titles, jobs, or property. The aliens around her never let her forget it. A heavy-set Tharn warrior guffawed loudly as he bit into a thick leg of roasted meat, letting juices drip onto the floor deliberately in front of her. "Look at the exile," he sneered. "Can't she smell it? A pity her kind can't digest real food anymore. What a waste." His companions laughed, smacking their claws on the table. Another alien, a sharp-beaked saurial, tossed a scrap of bread near her feet. "Hey, little Veyari rat, eat like the vermin you are." Lyra's cheeks burned, but she did not move. Hunger gnawed at her, sharp and constant, yet pride kept her still. The rations distributed by the station didn't suit her physiology. The compounds were too coarse, and her stomach rejected them. She had gone 3 days now with only water. The laughter grew louder. She tried to ignore it, staring at the floor, wishing her mother's voice could comfort her. But her mother had died during the exodus, skin clinging to bone as the food ran out. Lira still heard her whisper, "Endure, little one. Someone will remember kindness." Yet no one remembered. Or so she thought. At another table, a man had been watching quietly. He was human, one of the few on Kairon. The aliens considered his kind strange, short-lived, restless, too quick to fight and too stubborn to surrender. This man was broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back, a faint oil stain marking his sleeve. His name was Reyes, an engineer contracted to maintain the station's aging power grids. He had heard the laughter echoing across the hall, the sneeze thrown like knives at the girl who sat in silence. Something in her posture, trembling hands, head bowed in humiliation, struck him with a familiar pang. He remembered his grandmother telling him stories of Earth's famines, of how neighbors had shared crusts of bread when there was nothing else. "No one should eat alone when they are hungry," she had said. Daniel rose from his seat. Conversations faltered as he crossed the hall. The sneering Tharn warrior smiked, leaning back to watch the spectacle. Lira dared not look up when Boots stopped at her table. She braced herself for more ridicule. Instead, a warm, steady voice said, "Come dine with me." The words sliced through the haze of mockery. Silence rippled outward, swallowing laughter. Dozens of eyes fixed on the human standing over her. Lira blinked, confused. She looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were steady, brown and earnest, not mocking. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. The Tharn barked out a laugh. "You'd share your table with an exile? Humans truly have no pride." Daniel didn't flinch. He extended his hand. "You look hungry," he said simply. "No one should starve in a place full of food." Her lips parted, words failing her. No one, not since her people's fall, had offered her a seat, let alone a meal. The jeers of the crowd pressed against her ears, but beneath it was something else, the steady, impossible kindness in this stranger's voice. Slowly, hesitantly, Lira placed her fragile hand in his. His grip was firm, not pitying but respectful. He helped her rise, ignoring the snickers around them. As Daniel guided her across the hall, whispers followed. "Madness. Humans don't understand strength. He'll regret it." But Lyra's chest ached with something unfamiliar. Hope. For the first time since her world had burned, someone had not turned away. Someone had looked at her hunger and answered it with humanity. She clung to the words as though they were sustenance themselves. "Come dine with me." A meal shared, a bond forged. Daniel's quarters were modest compared to the lavish lounges of wealthier species on Kairon Station. The walls hummed with old power conduits, and the air smelled faintly of machine oil. But it was clean, ordered, and warm. 3 things Lira had almost forgotten could exist together. She perched nervously on the edge of a metal chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her gaze darted around the room, wide with both caution and disbelief. No one had ever invited her into private quarters before. Certainly not a human. Daniel moved about with practiced ease, pulling out sealed rations from a storage cabinet. He glanced at her, noting the hollowness of her cheeks, the way her eyes tracked every movement like a wary animal. "You can't eat the standard protein packs, right?" he asked. Lira flinched, then nodded. "The compounds are toxic to my kind." "Thought so." He set aside the regular ration bricks and instead retrieved a pack of human-grade produce, vegetables, grains, dried meats. "My grandmother's recipes are simple. We'll keep it plain and see what works for you." As he cooked, the room filled with the faint scent of broth and simmering grains. Lyra's stomach tightened painfully at the smell, yet she forced herself not to lean forward like a child. Pride, even in ruin, still clung to her. Daniel glanced at her again, offering a faint smile. "You can relax. You're safe here." Safe. The word was almost alien to her. When he placed a steaming bowl before her, she hesitated. Her people held food as sacred. To eat in front of another was to acknowledge trust, to lower one's guard. Yet this human had offered her dignity when no one else had. She raised the spoon with trembling fingers, tasting cautiously. The warmth spread through her, filling the hollow pit of hunger with something she had nearly forgotten: comfort. A second spoonful followed, then a third. Soon, she was eating faster, almost desperately. Daniel didn't interrupt. He sat opposite her, eating his own meal slowly, giving her the silence she needed. Only when she finally set down the spoon, tears glistening at the edges of her eyes, did he speak. "Better." She nodded quickly, then pressed her hands to her face. I'm sorry. It's been so long since." Her voice cracked. "Since anyone cared." Daniel's voice was steady. "Don't apologize for being hungry. I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories. How, during Earth's hard times, neighbors shared bread when there was nothing else. She always told me, no one should go hungry if you have enough to share." Lyra's tears spilled freely now. "My people once believed the same. On Veyari, meals were shared across families, and no one ate until the youngest and oldest was served. But after the war, after the camps, all of that was broken. We became beggars." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Then let's start small. Tonight, you're not a beggar. You're my guest." The words settled over her like a blanket. She had been called exile, vermin, parasite, but never guest. For a long time, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the station beyond the walls. Then, softly, Lira asked, "Why? Why risk mockery? Or worse, for me?" Daniel shrugged, "Because it was the right thing to do." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any elaborate justification could have. In her world, every act was weighed against survival or gain. This human had chosen kindness without profit, without calculation. Later, when she rose to leave, her steps were steadier, her body warmed by food and something deeper. At the door, she paused. "Thank you, Daniel Reyes." Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of a vow. "I will not forget this." He gave her an encouraging smile. "Then tomorrow, come back. We'll eat again." As Lira walked the dim corridors back toward the refugee barracks, whispers followed her. Some mocked, some sneered, but others watched with curiosity. The story was already spreading. A human fed in exile. For Lira, the ridicule of the whole still echoed in her ears. But now another sound drowned it out, the steady, unshakable words that had drawn her out of despair. "Come dine with me." Kindness against cruelty. Rumors traveled quickly on Kairon Station. Within 2 days, every cantina, docking bay, and trading post buzzed with the same tale. A human had fed a Veyari exile. For most, it was an amusing scandal. For others, it was a threat. Daniel Reyes soon discovered that small acts of defiance rarely remained small. When he reported to the engineering bay the following morning, he was met not with his usual assignments but with a summons to the administrative council. The council chamber was a tall, circular room designed to intimidate. Representatives of various species lounged in curved seats that rose like steps of a theater, all looking down upon the accused. Daniel stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, as the chief administrator, a reptilian Joth, slithered forward. "Human Reyes," the Joth hissed, "you have broken station protocol. Refugee exiles are not to be granted access to private quarters, nor shared rations. Such behavior undermines order." Daniel met its gaze evenly. Order built on cruelty isn't order. It's decay. A murmur rippled across the chamber. Some laughed, others frowned. The Jotha's tongue flicked irritably. "The Veyari are a defeated race. They must learn their place." "They are people," Daniel replied, "and no person should starve in the shadow of plenty." The chamber erupted. Mockery, outrage, disbelief. Yet Daniel did not flinch. The administrators could threaten, could sneer, but they could not erase what he had already done. Meanwhile, in the human quarters, Lira had returned. She was stronger now, her steps less unsteady, her eyes brighter. After her second meal, she had insisted on helping. Daniel had allowed her to accompany him into the maintenance tunnels, where he checked failing conduits and recalibrated power nodes. To his surprise, Lira understood the systems almost instinctively. Her people, it turned out, had once been master builders of energy networks. As her hands moved deftly across the control panel, she explained, "The Joth redesigned this node poorly. That's why it overheats." Daniel grinned. "You're hired." She smiled for the first time in months, a small and fragile expression that warmed him more than he cared to admit. Word spread again, not only that the human fed a Veyari, but that the Veyari girl had talents. Soon, other exiles began appearing near the human quarters. At first they lingered in the corridors, hesitant. Then, as Daniel began cooking extra portions, they gathered openly, forming a quiet line. It was nothing grand, just bowls of broth, bread, and fruit passed from hand to hand. Yet on a station where exiles were spat upon, this act was revolutionary. Not everyone approved. One evening, as Daniel and Lira served food to a cluster of weary exiles, a group of Tharn warriors stormed in. Their leader, the same brute who had mocked Lira in the food hall, shoved his way to the front. He sneered at the bowls lined neatly on the table, playing host to vermin again. "Human, you shame yourself." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, meeting the warrior's eyes calmly. "If giving food is shameful, then I'll wear it proudly." The Tharn spat on the floor. "Your kindness makes them weak. Strength comes from hunger, from clawing for survival." Before Daniel could reply, Lira stepped forward. Her voice trembled but did not break. "Strength comes from enduring cruelty, yes, but greater strength comes from compassion. He fed me when you laughed at my suffering. Tell me, which of you will be remembered as strong?" The whole fell silent. Even the Tharn hesitated, his mouth curling in uncertainty. Finally, with a grunt, he turned and stormed out, his companions trailing behind. Daniel looked at Lira, pride flickering in his eyes. She had stood not just for herself, but for all of her people. That night, as Daniel returned to his quarters, he found a crude message scrawled on his door in alien script. "Traitor to order. Watch yourself." He traced the letters with his fingers, then smiled grimly. Acts of kindness, he realized, had consequences, but so did cruelty. And if the galaxy feared kindness, then perhaps that was exactly what humanity was meant to bring. The table that changed the stars. The food shortage struck without warning. A supply convoy, delayed by pirate raids, failed to arrive. Storage silos emptied faster than anyone expected. Prices soared, and fear spread like fire in oxygen. The laughter that had once echoed in the food halls of Kairon fell silent, replaced by arguments, shouting, even brawls. For the first time, the powerful races felt hunger gnaw at their bellies. And for the first time, the exiles were no longer the only ones suffering. Daniel had seen it coming. The station's reserves had been dwindling for weeks, ignored by officials too concerned with trade tariffs and political games. Now chaos pressed in on every corridor. In the midst of it, the small soup line outside the human quarters remained. Daniel, with Lira at his side, opened his stores, rationing carefully. Exiles, humans, and soon even curious aliens lined up. Bowls passed from hand to hand. Quiet words of gratitude murmured where jeers had once been. It was not enough to end the shortage, but it was enough to give people hope. The council was furious. Daniel was summoned again, this time under threat of sanction. The Joth administrator's scales rippled with anger as it hissed. You undermine authority with your charity. Distribution is our responsibility. Daniel stood his ground. Then why aren't you doing it? The chamber erupted, officials shouting over one another. Some demanded his exile, others sneered at human foolishness. But in the streets beyond the council walls, the story was different. Whispers spread of the human who fed the hungry, of the Veyari girl who helped him rebuild broken systems to keep the soup line running. The people began to gather outside the council chamber, exiles, laborers, even a few merchants, chanting for fair rations. The council's power, built on fear, began to crack. Lira's transformation was plain for all to see. No longer hollow-eyed, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of her people's old traditions. She calculated ration schedules, designed fair distribution charts, and explained them to crowds in clear, patient tones. This is not weakness, she declared one evening as dozens listened in the comments. This is survival with honor. The human taught me that strength is not in hoarding but in sharing. We endure not by crushing the hungry, but by feeding them. The word struck deep. Even species that once mocked her bowed their heads. The backlash came swiftly. Late one night, saboteurs hurled waste and fire gel at the entrance of the human quarters. Daniel and Lira doused the flames before they spread. But the message was clear. Stop, or be destroyed. Daniel turned to Lira. Soot streaked across his face. They are scared. She tilted her head. Of you? No, he said. Of us. Of what feeding someone really means. It means admitting they are worth something. The crisis reached its peak 3 days later. The council, desperate to reassert control, announced a crackdown. Unauthorized food distribution would be banned. Anyone feeding exiles would be punished. But when guards marched toward the human quarters to enforce the order, they found not a handful of refugees but hundreds waiting. Humans, Veyari, Sorial, even some Than, all standing shoulder to shoulder. Bowls and spoons clattered against tables in defiance. Daniel stepped forward, voice ringing out across the hall. If you want to stop us, then you will have to starve us all. Because here, everyone eats. The guards faltered. The crowd surged with cheers. For the first time, the power of unity outweighed the council's decrees. In the weeks that followed, the council had no choice but to adapt. Official rationing was restructured, drawing heavily on the systems Lira had designed. Exiles were granted equal shares. And though resentment lingered, the mockery of the starving was no longer tolerated openly. The galaxy did not change overnight, but Kairon Station did. One evening, long after order had returned, Daniel set another bowl before Lira at a crowded table. Around them, exiles and merchants and soldiers all ate together, no longer divided by scorn. Lira looked down at the food, then at Daniel. Her voice was soft but sure. You didn't just feed me. You gave me back my people's honor. Daniel raised his glass. Then let's make sure no one loses it again. The table erupted in laughter and clinking cups. For the first time since she could remember, Lira laughed too. And across the galaxy, the story spread. In a universe that worshipped power and scorned weakness, one human had shown that kindness could starve cruelty, and that a single shared meal could feed hope for countless others.